Let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy. And a new poll out this morning shows, get this, that 14% of Democrats who openly voted for Joe Biden, they voted for him. They were excited about voting for him. They hate Trump, whatever. They were absolutely going to be in the can for Joe Biden. 14% of them would now vote for this newest candidate in the mix, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That's right. Yesterday, Bobby Kennedy announced he's running for president of the United States. Again, Joe Biden against Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket for the primary. Now, Marianne Williamson also on there. The mainstream media, though, has been like bending over backwards, already trying to discredit his announcement. Look at the New York Times today. This is crazy. This is how the New York Times tweeted out their article on this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced a presidential campaign on Wednesday, but built on litigating COVID-19 shutdowns and shaking Americans' faith in science, the New York Times writes. He joins Marianne Williamson as the second Democratic candidate to officially enter the race. Like, that's how the New York Times presented this. To which Caitlin Johnstone tweeted this, ha ha ha, holy shit, this is not even an opinion piece. This is a New York Times news report telling you that a presidential candidate's campaign is built on shaking Americans' faith in science.
It's assuming that you are totally fine with the way COVID-19 went down.
Right.
Like, yeah, that was cool. I'm fine with that, the way that you all handled that. Yeah,
lockdowns, everything. 2 years of now being behind because for our children in schools as a result of that. All sorts of issues with vaccines. You're fine with that. You're fine with that. So that's what his campaign is built on. That's not what his campaign is built on. Why is the New York Times telling you that?
Because they can frame his social media around anti-COVIDism, because he has been very vocal about COVID-like lockdowns and restrictions and vaccine mandates and the vaccine, quite frankly. So it will be easy. It's an easy build for them to sort of build him up as a conspiracy theorist. They think. And I only think that works if you are unwilling to sort of review your life experience of the pandemic. Because most of us, I mean, I was sort of a COVIDist, like, oh, yes, I will wear the mask and I will, stay home and I will only have a few people go to the garbage even when we took the trash out, right?
Kid Rock was the same way. Kid Rock in his interview with Tucker Carlson, he's like, I washed my hands 5 times a second. He's like, I wore a mask. I did everything, and it's like, yeah, because that's what they were telling.
And so then if you are unwilling to sort of review that and think, why did I think that? Who told me to think that? Where was the science behind that? And who had a power grab because I was willing to do that? Then, if you're not willing to do that, this headline is fine.
Right.
I think. But if you've actually been like, yeah, I don't know why I did that. I should have thought that through, or I should have looked up certain things, or I was listening to this. Then yeah, this headline is like, oh, okay, he's one of those. He makes us review something uncomfortable. Do not want.
So Bobby Kennedy started off his announcement yesterday. We're going to go through a couple of, I think, some key moments here. He talked yesterday. He kind of kicked things off by focusing not on COVID vaccines, but instead on Ukraine asking and asking the question, why are we there? Listen.
If you just want to ask, is it in our national interest? It is not. It is not in America's national interest to push Russia closer to China. That is a cataclysm. Number 2, it's not in our national interest to do something that could involve us in a nuclear exchange with a country that has more nuclear weapons than us. We need to know as Americans, and we have a right to know, what is our government's chief objective in this war. Now, we were told initially that the objective was humanitarian. And that is a good reason to be there, a humanitarian. And what that means is trying to end the bloodshed and minimize it as much as possible. But in recent times, President Biden said that one of our objectives, at least, is regime change of Vladimir Putin. And this is the same strategy that did not work well for us in Iraq. And it's many of the same people who are around the neocons, who are around President Biden, who have been talking about that for a long time and have been engaged in geopolitical machinations in the Ukraine since 2014.
So they've been there since 2014. This has been the plan all along. People asking, well, what's wrong with Kennedy's voice? If for those of you who aren't familiar, he has what's called spasmodic dysphonia, where the voice muscles contract involuntarily, leading to like a totally distorted voice. So it's laryngeal dysphonia or something like that.
It sounds really painful, but if you can get through it, he's saying really important things.
Yeah. So pay attention to exactly what he's saying because it's important. Something. Then he said something. Is his father, of course, Robert Kennedy, ran for president. And one of the big platform pillars for Robert Kennedy was poverty. It was truly something that changed his life. If you read biographies of his father, he traveled around the country, spent time in the poorest cities in America, going to West Virginia, and he vowed to make that the centerpiece of his campaign at the time in the 1960s, that along with ending the war in Vietnam. Of course, that didn't fly. It wasn't a popular platform among the establishment. Of course, in the deep state, he was assassinated, never got a chance to live out that dream, of course. So his son last night talked about how the billions that we've been spending in Ukraine, what we could do with that money in the United States to treat poverty in the United States and what that would look like to eliminate poverty in the United States and lift people up. Watch.
We are starving American people, and we are cutting them off from the kind of aid that we should be giving, that we're instead spending on being the policeman of the world. We have 800 bases around the world now. We spend $880 billion a year on our military. We were supposed to get a peace dividend. After the Soviet Union collapsed, we were supposed to go from $6 billion to $2 billion. That was a peace dividend. And then we were going to spend the rest, bring it home, and build schools and infrastructure. Instead, we've made up a bunch of foreign enemies and different enemies and things that we got to do to spend more money. The military-industrial complex and the intelligence agencies are telling us instead of dropping it to 2, we raised it to 8.8.
Here's the part that I found utterly fascinating. He started referencing what the founding fathers laid out, which was not becoming an imperial nation, but instead making a strong America. And he even talked about his grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, who believed that the United States should be a fortress, armed fortress that should be protected. But the way that it's protected is not through massive military. Instead, it should be through a really strong economy and not going about trying to destroy other countries through imperialism. I was like, wow, who's saying that? Who's talking openly about that? So listen to what he said about how we've pushed basically China and Russia into that situation where they are doing that. And we have spread ourselves so thin, and we are an empire in total decline. Watch.
If you go back to the beginning of our history, our founders made so many clear warnings against Americans getting involved in foreign wars because they said trying to be an imperium abroad is going to destroy democracy at home. It is going to turn us into a garrison state, a national security state, and a surveillance state. They said the two are inconsistent. You cannot be an imperial nation abroad and a democracy at home. And and John Quincy Adams really spoke for all of the framers when he said, "America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy." It's something we cannot afford to do in our country. My grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, said, well, we need to build Fortress America. We need to arm ourselves to the teeth at home and make ourselves too expensive to conquer, and then build our economy, because the economy is the source of strength, not bullets and weapons. It's having a strong economy, a strong middle class.
Yeah, it's a keep your eyes on your own paper situation.
Right. Now, other people are saying, well, Trump has said something similar, but what we're going to get to here in a second, no one but Kennedy has talked about, which is literally removing the military bases around the world. So, there's a lot of, I've talked about this openly over the past couple of weeks, which is whenever we talk about the deep state, the idea of draining the swamp and eliminating the quote unquote deep state, you cannot have a conversation about doing that unless you're also talking about the military industrial complex, the thing that feeds the $900 billion a year that we spend in a budget to feed that beast, right? And so all of Trump's discussions about the deep state and removal of the deep state, unless I missed it, when his speech a few weeks ago really attacking the deep state, he didn't mention the military industrial complex as part of that deep state and as a part of that entrenched machine that needs to be eliminated.
Well, because Trump said a lot more of that on the campaign, and it did seem like, even in some reporting about, like, why can't we just withdraw from these certain places? He wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan. He wanted to withdraw from a lot of different places, and he was told, you just can't, sorry.
Right.
There were people who just, he wasn't going to do it personally. He didn't know how, but he didn't have anybody to, he didn't really know how to make that happen. And he was told that he couldn't.
And he had a lot of swamp monsters who latched on and got around him, who basically told him, no, you can't get out of Afghanistan. You can't leave Somalia. You can't leave Syria. You can't leave these places.
Yeah.
We have drone programs that are continuing. You can't do that, Mr. President. There was a lot of anger among the rank and file in the military. I know about that. But I've never heard it said like this. I'll tell you, I've never heard it said like this. So this was one of the big... Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we got $900 billion that's public that we account for. Well, you don't account for it, but we say that's what's going. But like you're talking about deep state, I guarantee there's secret money going all over the place that they have to hide so there's no money trail back to the real things that we're doing in some of these countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's the off the book stuff. Mm-hmm. Larry Johnson on our show a number of times, we've talked about this. Like that's the stuff we know about and hear about in a public congressional hearing. But all the off the book stuff that gets paid for is ridiculous. So this was one of the biggest applause moments of the speech, saying that his uncle, JFK, was lied to by the CIA directly and vowed to dismantle the CIA brick by brick after the Bay of Pigs invasion. Why do you think he was assassinated as a result? Watch.
And my uncle came into office 2 months later. He was fighting his intelligence apparatus and his military because they wanted to invade. They wanted to do the Bay of Pigs. He was totally against it, and he let them roll over him. And in the middle of the Bay of Pigs, he realized they were lying to him, and he realized the function of the intelligence agencies had become to provide the military-industrial complex with a constant pipeline of war. And he came out during the middle of the night during the Bay of Pigs catastrophe, and he said, I want to take the CIA. Alan Dulles had lied to him, Charles Cabell, Richard Bissell, Louis Lemitzer, Curtis LeMay had all lied to him through their teeth. And he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And, George W. Bush had the same problem. George W. Bush says the worst mistake he made as president was listening to CIA Director George Tenet tell him it was a slam dunk that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And so the neocons and CIA got to go into Iraq and throw out and do regime change. And we got now we've spent $8 trillion. And what do we get for that $8 trillion? Nothing. Worse than nothing.
Worse than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing. Worse than nothing. An entirely destabilized Middle East. Millions of migrants, of course, who've left, then have helped also destabilize parts of Europe as a result of it. Millions of deaths as a result.
Put that in perspective. Think of what $8 trillion would have done here for infrastructure in the United States. Just one war, $8 trillion. Imagine.
You can't even wrap your head around it. You can't imagine how different America would look if we took a war on our infrastructure, right? Or we declared war on our education system in the United States. It would be totally different. Our rail infrastructure, our highways, everything, our airports. And then so finally, Kennedy wrapped it up with this. He said he will also force Trump. This is the part that sort of gave me chills. He closed by sort of dropping this bomb, announcing that as president, he will close all of the military bases, all of the U.S. military bases around the world, and bring the troops home. What? Watch.
Yep.
And I'm going to bring the troops home, and I am going to start. I'm going to close the bases, and I'm going to start investing in the United States middle class in our country, and I'm going to make us an exemplary democracy again.
Well,
So,
Haven't heard that since Ron Paul, a Republican.
yeah. So then the question is, will the media let him say these things? Will he get airtime on the mainstream media? Will they actually cover him as anything more than a joke? Because these things are not funny.
no, I'm glad Tucker had him on last night. Tucker's a friend of his. He had him on last night. He speaks very highly of him. He's like, he talks about him openly. He says, RFK Jr. is one of the few like really honest people, really good people. And so he had him on the show last night. And he said, will you get open, honest requests from NBC and MSNBC and CNN and other things? I mean, imagine back in the day what they would have done to have a Kennedy on their show. How many times think about that for a second. And because they don't like that he attacks their sponsors, all of their big pharma sponsors that funnel billions of dollars to CNN and all these other networks, Tucker did a whole start off thing where he started making fun of My Pillow last night, and I thought it was a great take. He's like, imagine if we told you every night that My Pillow was the most important life-saving thing, right? And he did it as a sort of a contrast between big pharma always funneling billions of dollars or millions of dollars in advertising to the other networks, and if we had found out suddenly, he's like, what if we suddenly found out that My Pillow was killing people? Would we still push it? You would hate us. You would find us to be, And it was a funny contrast of this. And they don't like that he's called these advertisers out who funnel all of this money to these networks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Well, I was just going to say, like I told our moderator, Anthony, we were talking about this earlier, that, he's going to be an easy one for the establishment and the media to take down because of the things he talks about. The things that we want to talk about, the things that we sometimes talk about on this show and have been suspended for. That's going to be easy for them to marginalize him, I feel.
Yeah. But hopefully my hope is that these conversations now are allowed to happen. Mm-hmm. Right. So it opens up a broader dialogue about this.
Right.
You'll have news anchors who are able to engage on this question about all of the issues that we've seen with vaccines and everything else. Right.
Well, beyond that. Yeah. Like,
Ukraine.
why do you feel this way about Ukraine now when the coverage was different 10 years ago? Why, all kinds of questions that he can ask, maybe if they give him the platform to ask. But a lot of times they don't platform people like this who don't mimic their narrative.
Yeah. So let us know your thoughts on this. We're not picking, sides one way or the other on this. I just think this is the kind of guy you're not going to see in the mainstream media getting full coverage of his speech. So we want to share it here because that's our job.
Well, and
is to prevent.
Really quick, I want to ask you guys a question. Sorry about that. Well, what do you guys feel about him running as a Democrat? Do you think that that's going to be harder for him because he's going to be going up against Biden, or do you like he should have picked a different party, like a independent or something, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my own one sort of, knee-jerk like sort of reaction is, oh, he has to run as a Democrat, but he has such a deep history with that party. His family has such a deep history with that party. Maybe in his mind, he feels like he could rescue it somehow.
But also there are many Democrats who voted for Biden because they just were tired of Trump, who now feel like the left has been hijacked by the illiberal movement of all kinds of things, of censorship, authoritarianism, Antifa, and transhumanism, and all of these things. And they are actually willing to read the Twitter files and take them seriously and review their life experience of the pandemic and all of these things. And they do feel like Joe Biden is not actually, is one of these illiberal leftists. And I want to still be someone who I feel these certain values of, acceptance or however they, may describe themselves, but do want a candidate that's not Joe Biden because they are willing to think rationally. I think there are more Democrats than you think that are feeling just really disenfranchised by their own party.
Yeah. And, as an independent, of course, then you're up against a whole other host of issues trying to get yourself on a ballot. And there's a huge Democratic Party infrastructure that he is familiar with and probably has friends and close allies with. So who knows? We'll see. And then, of course, you've got Marianne Williamson in the mix. So it's going to be an interesting primary. A president of the United States, a sitting president of the United States, who's by all accounts demented, gave a speech yesterday at the White House and was lost, walked off, couldn't even find his way, didn't even know what he was doing.
Yeah.
So a sitting president of the United States is being primaried right now. It's a pretty amazing moment. So this election season is going to be absolutely crazy. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.